you very much for the European Association of Dance Movement Therapy. It's a great honor for me to be here today. I'm very impressed by your introductions. It seems like there is a lot of experience and expertise in this group. Unfortunately, I'm not part of this movement. I don't do movement therapy, and I see that as my greatest fault. However, my contribution could be some kind of bird's eye view, because I've been responding to multiple emergencies and I can see patterns, and that's something that I can share with you. I also, I've been trained in clinical psychodrama, and although I don't know everything about your focus work, it's enough for me to appreciate its importance when the trauma goes straight to the body and there are no words to express it. So I do see a lot of huge importance in your stepping into this field. So, I saw my presentation today as a kind of, a little bit of overview in terms of what are the specifics of the context that we enter. Then I will say a few words about how can we prepare ourselves and what are the competencies that we are looking for. Then I will say a little bit about programming or planning of our interventions and what to look for and what to consider. And maybe a few words about kind of, ethical concerns that may arise. Of course, I don't expect that any of you are going to do anything unethical. That's why I'm going to talk about the gray areas that kind of, come with the territory. So that's how I saw my brief presentation today. So the situation that we are dealing with has all the characteristics of so-called complex humanitarian emergency. Why is it important to consider? Because I think that someone here mentioned the interest into the systemic impact. It is hard to imagine anything else that would have such a systemic impact on all the areas of social functioning, human life, and coping. So usually examples could be mass displacement due to armed conflict or political violence. Many other situations can lead to that, but they all have something in common. And of course, we look right now into humanitarian crisis that develops in Ukraine. So all of them create enormous mental health needs. And these needs are so enormous that we cannot expect to meet them all. That is why the question usually comes, how do we prioritize and what would be our contribution, and how can we make the difference in the best and the most efficient way? It is impossible to get prepared, no matter how much different professional associations were doing to prepare to the emergencies and programs and NGOs. It's never enough. Now, usually in humanitarian emergency, we try to rely on the community mutual supports where professionals try to facilitate that. Unfortunately, when there is a mass displacement like we see now in Ukraine, community also might have challenges in supporting its members. And then no matter what kind of intervention we do, we need to consider that after we provided our work and support, this person may not get support after. Another consideration that is extremely important for us to consider, that those who provide this support, this work, also can be part of the same community and be subjected to the same elements. So all these kind of small things help us to shape, our programming and to keep in mind what do we need what do we need to address. And of course, it creates a question about how can providers prepare themselves. And I know this question did come up. First of all, we never know how ready we are until we get into the situation. Those of us, and I think that most of people who come from Europe have history, family history or personal history of survival, and kind of, looking how the family was managing, these adversities also can be an important experience. I've heard a lot of stories from those who were in Ukraine and also who were kind of, survivors and also refugees and the providers who were tapping into their experience of the survivorship in their family. For example, the survivorship during the World War II comes up very often among those with whom I talked. So, but in addition to that, what makes a provider ready? So it is very important to create an inventory of the strengths, supports, resilience, and also professional supports and professional resources that you can rely on. And this is the first component of psychological first aid, a method of choice that has been adopted by the World Health Organization and is being used by practically all the major NGOs when responding to humanitarian crises. And some of you, I think, those who have experience working with NGOs, you know what I'm talking about. So first, we need to get prepared. So in addition to that, we need to have information about the situation, not just out from the media, but also to look to the reliable sources and statistics. We also need to be fully aware of our competencies and the limits of such. And also where can we get additional emotional and professional support. And also to talk to other providers, how they can help each other and how they can take care of each other. So, so this part is on preparation. Now, of course, as mental health providers, we always talk about self-care. Right, so that's a big kind of, a catchphrase that has been used in the past. In my work, I suggested that the word self-care kind of, outlived its kind of, a little bit kind of, functionality, because a lot of people feel ambivalent about just using self-care, because if I self-care, it means that others have to do more. So it started coming up with a lot of connotations, which has become especially clear during the pandemic situation, right? So if one takes care of themselves, it means that others can get really upset with this person. So instead, what I proposed is the prioritizing of self-awareness. So self-awareness suggests that we, as a professionals, are able to be aware of the limits of our ability, of our capacity to work. So it would be efficient and safe for the patients and efficient and safe for ourselves. So, in order to do that, we need to be able to identify and address fantasies which very often hinder our work. And so there are three major fantasies that mental health providers and the providers, psychosocial providers face in the situation of the massive needs and adversity and suffering. One is the rescuer fantasy, when, it's a kind of, subconscious belief that we must rescue someone, whether they want it or not. We know better what they need. And it's a wonderful fantasy, but in my experience, in my practice, it comes up with huge number of boundaries violation. Person may not be even aware of that. So the second fantasy is a Superman fantasy. So, like fly in and fly out guy. It's a Superman fixture in American culture, right? Yeah, fixes everything and all done. So it doesn't work like that in the situation when needs are enormous. In addition, Superman has never been a team player. So we also, once we feel ourselves in this role, we need to kind of, work with our peers and supervisors to get feedback and grounding. And the third fantasy that kind of, is even more interesting, it's so-called helpers fantasy, when we tend as helpers to expect gratitude for our work. So this suggests the idea that we are working for thank you. In humanitarian emergency, we rarely are going to get it. Those people who get better, they leave, they disappear. Sometimes they might come back and thank us for that, but more likely than not, we will never see them again. Plus, humanitarian emergency, like any other trauma work, comes with a lot of anger. And since this anger goes to the adversity, but sometimes they have no one else to express it towards but us. And I've heard with a lot of helpers, a lot of psychosocial workers who take it personally. And that also becomes a major burnout point for all of us who get involved. So to counteract the effect of this fantasy should be to understand that we do this work not for them, but for ourselves, because it is our mission. That's what we are for. That's why we got this training, because we want to help, because we want to alleviate suffering. And it reminds us about, why we came to this field in the first place. We still, it's a good idea to get, support from peers, because sometimes it could be overwhelming. But this anger that persons encounter in this situation does not necessarily belong to you. So that's why self-care, self-awareness, and anything that relates to increase of understanding how it affects us personally, how these horrors affect us personally, is a good reason why now there is a strong suggestion that we should not do this work alone. We need to work with the teams, with a professional association, anywhere when we can find similarly minded persons with whom we can talk, with whom we can debrief, with whom we can get feedback, who are supportive, who are professional, who can help us. So that's a part of the preparedness. Next part is how do we execute this work, and what is the process and what things to consider when we do that. I already said that we need to act together and collaborate. The time when the Supermen were flying in and out, fixing, it's long gone. When you go to the field on the ground, you will see that a lot of organizations are being already involved and provide the services. And it is very important for us to understand that our ability to work in the chaotic environment is a big virtue, professional virtue if we get into this work. We need to be able to rapidly assess risks. Because I understand that your work, your area of expertise is wonderful in the way that it's probably one of the safest, interventions that I can imagine. However, you also understand that when we are expressing ourselves in any possible way, there is always risk that we might tap into the unresolved trauma, which can result into the unsafe behaviors. So we also need to be prepared how is going to be addressed, if there is a referral system where we can refer, or there are peers who can help us with resolving that. We need to be able to tolerate intense distress and reactions. So usually in my trainings, I help person to navigate, working with very angry or very emotional person, because in the beginning, sometimes people might just get scared of that, although that's the way how a person expresses trauma. When we work in the with a humanitarian emergency, sometimes we need to be able to accept tasks that go a little bit outside of our primary area of expertise, because we also understand that if person is hungry, or if the person is not safe, or if the person just lost loved one, right? So our work needs to be really adjusted to the situation, and we need to address or advocate for addressing, basic needs first. So it doesn't mean that if I'm a psychologist, I'm going there to do only psychological work if I can help the person to find a way to get some food. So, and for for my profession, it suddenly comes up as a kind of a little bit of unusual or unexpected kind of, suggestion. But that's the nature of humanitarian emergency. We also need to be able to work, to be globally minded and to work with different cultures. And I know that your work is extremely culture oriented, and my huge respect for that. But also there could be different groups within the culture. There could be different developmental levels. It's important to be able to distance yourself from political kind of, issues, because this situation is extremely politically charged, right? And maybe to think, how would you respond if the persons who need help and their political views on the situation might be different from yours? Will you be able to work with this person? Who are you going to refer this person to, etc., etc., etc.? So all that becomes a really big issue when we work in the humanitarian emergencies. So another suggestion is, when we do this work, we try to coordinate this work with other agencies, because the big characteristic of humanitarian emergency is the fragmentation of the services. So usually it is a very good idea to know who works on the ground, who else provides services, and how you can collaborate with them. Because it's a big sin of the responding to this situation when we try to create alternative parallel structures which bring more chaos into already extremely chaotic situation. So I know that for some approaches it could be more difficult than for others. But just to think in these terms may help, with doing programming and planning. Before we do anything, we also need to do capacity and resource assessments. This humanitarian emergency is different from what I've seen in other continents or countries. Like, obviously the response is going to be different from how we would plan this response in Africa. So in Ukraine and neighboring countries, there is a huge amount of very well-trained mental health providers, trauma specialists, and it is important to kind of, capitalize on them. And here we are going into the role of the outsiders. So what is actually our role to preserve the integrity of the response? In general, the suggestion is we are there to help those who are, who have invested into their own country, into their own recovery. So we are not doing this work for them. They're supposed to lead the response. We are there to help them. So they know their people, they know their needs. So I know that sometimes it's hard to kind of consider, but we also need to understand that we are coming and leaving, they are staying. They know the culture, they know the language. We are there to help. We can discuss what interventions kind of, are, better and what are worse, but what you're doing, providing trainings, refers to capacity building, which is a wonderful, wonderful approach when you expect that the people there are going to pick up from there after you leave and will not be able to help. And this collaboration as well. Few considerations that came up during my work already in responding to this emergency. So although we do provide mental health work for free of charge, most of us, right? So we need also to consider how these providers who are on the ground, who support Ukrainians, who are from Ukraine themselves, how are they going to be paid for their services? For them, it's a matter of survival. Right. So if we encourage these people to provide the services, it's always, it came up already. People need to eat. right? So it's kind of, so just to consider that in planning how if there a way to support them in their work beside just training them, right? How they can get kind of, So anything that we do, when we start doing, we need to plan for termination from the beginning. That's another golden rule of humanitarian response. So what happens after we leave? So we wouldn't leave these people out and about, without any supports. And of course, we need to be able to always think about accountability. Who are we accountable to? Are we accountable to people that we serve, or to our funders, or to our professional bodies that may disagree with our work? So there are a lot of things that we need to think before kind of, we are developing and coming into this field. And of course, we need to take care of all the personnel who we trained, and also volunteers. And our staff becomes our responsibility, because someone mentioned here how to get used to this, terrible atrocity. That's what we have to do. We need to put planning into how are we going to support them in their very important and sometimes very difficult work, because they're part of the community. There is a lot of things to talk about, but I guess you have other very exciting things that are planned for today.
Yeah, thank you, Elena. This was really a lovely overview for us. I think that also puts us into a sort of placeholder, I feel, for the work that will come this afternoon. But maybe also good to check if there are one or two questions in terms of clarification. Would you be willing to take these? Or
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Olivia.
Hi, Elena. I'm so sorry. I'm traveling and I came on late. It's so wonderful to meet you, and I'm so happy this happened. And
thank you, Olivia. Olivia was the one who brought me, who found me in the metaverse.
Also for the others, it's what I already introduced, Olivia, that you made the connection between Elena and the EADMT. So thank you now in person for this.
Yeah,
I
have
a question for Elena.
I do, if it's
please.
And if you covered it already, then my apologies. But in the work that I read of yours, you talked about humanitarian values as underscoring the ethics in global mental health. And this was when you were talking of the distinction between global mental health and regular mental health. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit to what those values are.
Yeah, in our professional codes of ethics, we all are trying to be impartial. We prioritize humanitarian values. Just basically, we attend to those who need it most, without thinking about their political or religious views. Professionally, we also try to not to get involved into the political controversy, which is very difficult to do in the situation like we see right now. So, and these humanitarian values that, which is actually our call. So we need to look more as a kind of, beacon for our work, guiding principles, rather than practical principles. Because yes, how can we measure who suffers most? Right? So how do we prioritize? How do we choose those whom we help and those who we don't help? So in practical world, it can become really challenging. We also cannot advocate if we kind of, maintain the principles of impartiality, because we take sides. Right. And there have been a huge movement in the humanitarian sector that suggested that our kind of, values, professional values outweigh that. So we need to advocate. If we see something, we need to say something. We are in a very important position. We are able to témoignage. Basically, we are witnessing what happens. Our kind of advocacy role becomes so much stronger for that. It's not just kind of, general words, but that's what we do. Yeah, and so that's what drives us. In terms of how to apply it for our practical work, it's a little bit different. But yeah, that's what we are trying to achieve, to help everyone who needs our help and who suffers.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this answer. Also, for this refers to the witnessing role that we have as well, right? I think for dance movement therapists, this is really a very meaningful connection, because we have this practice of witnessing. So that is in this, yeah, it's also a nice bridge to see how this is also helping us to be situated in the humanitarian context. Thank you very much, Elena. Time-wise, we have to move on. So if there are any other questions coming up, I'm sure we will find our way to you through the email. For now.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I wanted to thank you for your enthusiasm, for your desire to help, for being ready for that. And today is Monday, you know, it's a very symbolic day in many cultures that symbolizes, you know, the renewal, rejuvenation, and kind of trying to heal the world. Yeah. So thank you very much. Good luck with your work, and to get good care of yourself.